On the night of December 6th, 2004, everything seemed fine when Jane Rimel dressed up for work. She was working the night shift and had to leave her 5-year-old daughter, Emily Rimel, in the care of her then-boyfriend, Brent Copley. By the time she returned the next morning, Emily was nowhere to be found. That was the last time Emily was ever seen alive. What happened to the little girl? Who took her? And why did it take nearly 2 years to solve the case? When Jane Rimel returned from work on the morning of December 7th, she was met with devastating news. Emily, her 5-year-old daughter, was gone. She'd kissed her goodnight just hours earlier, and now the little girl had vanished without a trace. To make matters worse, Emily wasn't the only one missing. A family friend identified as Lindsay Bruce was in the house the night before. He had been there when Jane left for work. Bruce was a frequent visitor, and he sometimes stayed overnight in the couple's one-bedroom apartment. The night of December 6th was one of those nights. Jane and her boyfriend Copley were used to having Bruce over, so they didn't think much of it when he decided to stay the night. However, when Copley woke up the next morning, he immediately realized that something was terribly wrong. Jane and Copley shared one car, so Copley often woke up early to pick her up from work before taking Emily to school. But that morning was different. The front door was unlocked, and both Emily and Bruce were gone. Ordinarily, Bruce leaving wouldn't be much of an issue. He was an adult and could take care of himself. But when Copley couldn't find Emily, who should have been getting ready for school anywhere in the house, it set off alarm bells. Emily was not the kind of child to wander off without saying anything. Besides, her only pair of shoes and her coat were still in the house. All of this pointed to one thing: she had been taken. Jane and Copley immediately called the authorities, who issued an Amber Alert for Emily. At the time, no one could have guessed that this was the beginning of a case that would drag on for nearly 2 years. While officers were out canvassing the area in search of the little girl, detectives began working the case from another angle. They interviewed Emily's mother, Jane, and her live-in boyfriend, Copley. Detectives took DNA samples from both of them and even examined Copley for any marks, wounds, or scratches that could suggest a struggle, but they found nothing. Next, authorities carried out a thorough search of the couple's home and Copley's car. But once again, they came up empty-handed. Investigators were growing desperate. In a case like this, time was of the essence, and they couldn't afford to leave any stone unturned. Since they didn't have any other leads, they brought in Jane's cousin, Lila Wright, who was Bruce's girlfriend at the time. Up to this point, no one had seen or heard from Bruce. Investigators were certain that his disappearance and Emily's were somehow connected, but they wouldn't know for sure until they spoke to him. The authorities knew that they had to find Bruce, and they had to find him fast. So they sent officers to his mother's house, where he often stayed. But he wasn't there. They searched every corner of the property, yet there was no sign of him anywhere. Where was Bruce? And why did he disappear from Jane's house unannounced that morning? When they couldn't find Bruce, authorities shifted their focus to Lila, suspecting that, as his girlfriend, she'd be the first person he'd try to contact. And sure enough, Bruce called her later that morning. On the call, Lila told Bruce the police were looking for him and wanted to speak with him. She then handed over the phone to an officer who was with her. Bruce told the officer he was at home and agreed to talk to the police. Moments later, officers from Madison Township and Columbus showed up at his door. Bruce spoke to the police and permitted the authorities to search his car. However, when detectives asked to take his DNA samples, he refused. Bruce disappearing from the house that morning at around the same time Emily went missing was suspicious enough, but his refusal to provide DNA samples all but confirmed detectives' worst fears about his connection to the case. Within 13 hours of Emily's disappearance, detectives secured a court order to collect Bruce's DNA. While taking the samples, they noticed he had several cuts on his fingers and an injury on his arm. It didn't seem like a coincidence. When officers searched Bruce's car, they noticed the floor was cluttered and dirty, but the seats were spotless. Among the clutter, they found a bottle of Armor All polish that had recently been used. Why would anyone clean their car seats but leave the rest of the car dirty? Unless they had something to hide. While the DNA obtained from Bruce was being analyzed, the search for Emily continued in earnest. Days passed, but there was still no trace of the little girl anywhere. It was like she had vanished into thin air. 10 days after Emily disappeared, on December 17, 2004, the case took a shocking turn. Detectives obtained a warrant to arrest Lindsay Bruce after they found out that the DNA samples taken from his genitals contained male and female DNA, and that the female DNA belonged to Emily. The presence of Emily's DNA in the forensic sample collected from Bruce was undeniable proof that he had not only kidnapped the little girl, but also assaulted her. Following his arrest, he was charged with 1 count of kidnapping and 1 count of rape. Bruce's trial began in September 2005. And after 8 days of listening to testimonies and reviewing evidence, the jury found him guilty of kidnapping but acquitted him of the assault charge. He received a 10-year sentence for the kidnapping conviction, but the case was far from over. Although authorities had arrested the suspect, Emily was still missing, and so the search for her continued. For nearly a year, there were no new leads, and the case seemed to be going cold. But everything changed in May 2006, when a couple who were out fishing discovered a human skull. The skull was later identified as the remains of Emily Rimel. After a year and a half, the little girl had finally been found, but in the most heartbreaking condition. Armed with this new information, prosecutors charged Lindsay Bruce with aggravated murder. He had to face justice for what he had done to Emily. However, the murder trial didn't start until March 2007. During the trial, prosecutors stated that Bruce had kidnapped Emily, taken advantage of her, and then killed her. Bruce's defense attorney, Christopher Cooper, contended this belief by saying that there was no evidence directly connecting Bruce to Emily's death. Despite Cooper's attempts to plant doubt in the minds of the jury, the prosecution had built a solid case, complete with a lineup of witnesses to support their claims. Throughout the trial, several testimonies revealed shocking details about the case. Many of these came from inmates who had shared a cell with Bruce at some point. According to them, Bruce described himself as a sex addict with a drinking problem. One witness testified that Bruce had admitted to being drunk on the night of December 6th. In his drunken state, he attacked Emily, and by the time he realized what he had done, it was already too late. The witness said Bruce claimed he and his girlfriend Lila often used that room for sexual activities, and that the encounter with Emily happened there as well. When he was done with the little girl, Bruce choked her to death because she threatened to tell on him. He then wrapped her up in the sheets and took her out of the house. While behind bars, Bruce opened up about his crime to quite a number of people, but he made sure not to disclose the location of Emily's body, because he said his attorney instructed him to keep that information a secret. Among the witnesses who testified, only one mentioned that Bruce felt guilty about what he had done because Emily's parents were his best friends. In March 2007, the murder trial came to an end, and the jury convicted 25-year-old Lindsay Bruce for the 2004 murder of 5-year-old Emily Rimel. During the sentencing, the Franklin County Common Pleas Judge Patrick Sheeran, who presided over the case, told Bruce that he had committed an unspeakable act. In the end, Lindsay Bruce was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Bruce will be behind bars for the rest of his life, the memories of 5-year-old Emily Rimel will continue to live in the hearts of those that loved her. With so many lingering questions, what do you think really happened to Emily Rimel, and has justice truly been served? Let us know your theories in the comments.